Dear friends, I warmly welcome you to our interactive program for youth and adults, IPYA. The theme of our interaction today is the church and homosexuality. And the big question is, what is the position of the church on homosexuality? Our speaker today is the Very Reverend Father Michael Udubela, OSJ. And our moderator today is Reverend Father Oscar John Obi. Welcome, dear Father.
Looking at this very topic that we are contemplating or sharing today, it has become a very sensitive matter, so to say, and we must be conscious of that also. And then asking whether the church's position about the subject matter has changed. Well, I think we need to take a journey together to see what that is about and how we can, each of us can actually draw the curtain and then conclude together whether that position has changed or it has not changed. And whatever situation or reaction we want to then put forward, we will see that as we engage ourselves later in the open discussion. So first and foremost is just to say that the church generally does not differentiate among people according to gender or sexual identities. The church doesn't recognize one as heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual when relating to us. We are simply seen, recognized as persons, first and foremost, persons created in the image and likeness of God, men and women, male, female, brothers and sisters. And because we are made in the image and likeness of God, we enjoy the same dignity, equal dignity and integrity. And that means that all of us, every one of us, should deserve to be loved and at the same time respected without any form of discrimination as with boy. But then the concept of homosexuality actually has been one that actually has been steering the tide for some time, and it is not a new thing. It has been there for a very long time, and it's the discussion also is still present and it's ongoing. So I want to understand what is homosexuality itself. Simply put, it's an interest, sexual interest in and attraction to members of one's own sex. So we can talk about that in terms of being gay, usually used to address male homosexuals, or being a lesbian, usually used to address female homosexuals. And at the same time also, we can talk about the expansion of the whole idea of homosexuality today, because we're no longer just talking about your lesbian, but we talked about the LGBTQIA plus, with the LGBT itself being the lesbian, the gay, the bisexual, the transgender, the queer gender, the questioning, the intergender, intersex, the asexual agenda, and the plus that can accommodate as many things as possible. So all of these things are part of the things that we begin to see when we begin to talk about identities. We talk about what we identify as or what we identify with, and there are just a number of them. So usually talking about this, we want to see, talking about sexuality as it were, we talk about, our biological makeup, how we were born, and what's, the sex that actually is assigned to us biologically, genetically, right from the moment, of our conception. Because once the human person is conceived and begins to form, the sex of the person is also identified. But of course, being born and all of that, growing, we want to begin to feel identifying with some particular traits or not, and then we can say, okay, I identify myself as a male when I'm a male, or as a female, I'm a female, or I can say, okay, it's the other way. That is part of the trend. Is actually on ground, and this is why we have all of this LGBT, IA, and the plus that followed. So we talked about the biological understanding of what the feature, and then the social implication also, which is actually can be conceived in the sense of nurture, the things that also could influence the way we live out our lives, our sexuality, and all of that, and there could be a combined factor also that is, could be talked in terms of nature and nurture. So some etiological theories also, we talk about the roots of some of this discussion about homosexuality, what happens over time. So homosexuality has been seen, being judged from different angles, and some of these are what I have named as the typologies, the theories of pathology, which we'll see, beginning also with the DSM, the dictionary for the psychosocial, what do you call that, the DSM as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's by the American Psychiatric Association. How it has also, over time, developed the whole idea of what homosexuality looks like, psychologically and all of that, to what we have today. So these theories of pathology, in a nutshell, we talk about homosexuality as a disease, as a condition deviating from the normal, a sign of defect, a moral and social evil, and all of that. And then we have the theories of immaturity, tending towards the homosexuality being a normal step towards development of an adult or heterosexual, and of course, a kind of being caught up in a kind of arrested development, stunt growth, sexual immaturity, and the rest of them. And then there is a third typology that talks about the theories of normation or normation variation, that homosexuality as a natural difference, a normal sexual variation. That is what we are seeing today, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus standard position of today. And then the psychology dictionary that I already mentioned, the DSM, over time also has given some understanding, which we have seen as evolving considerations on this. In the DSM-1, homosexuality itself was considered as a mental disorder, and with some protests that came up after that release of the DSM, and the DSM-7 that actually came about later, that reflected the 7th edition, the DSM-2, the 7th printing, actually changed that position of mental disorder to look at homosexuality as a sexual orientation disturbance. And then the 1973 that actually also, was replaced by a new category of ego-dystonic homosexuality, and then 87, DSM-3 revised, talked about ego-dystonic homosexuality, which was eventually removed. And then the idea of a disorder has been removed entirely, and then a variation, has come to replace that. And then the World Health Organization also, has removed homosexuality from international classification of a disease. So it is not seen any longer as something that is mentally associated, but as something that is a variation, a different way of identifying oneself and all of that. So these are what we have seen over time, and this is where we are today, universally talking about the subject matter, and everyone also, in one way or the other, has had to begin to take a position or the other. But how does the church come into all of this? I decided to give it as a background so that we can have a kind of a look at what we are discussing. And I believe that the term homosexuality is not strange to any of us anymore. We have heard about it, and we have seen videos or perhaps films and all of that portray persons also of homosexual tendencies, and perhaps also those who have self-declared homosexuals, and it means that some of these things are things that actually have come so close to us than before, when we just do not know about them or only hear them. Now I think we can see them around us. So what is it that the church has to do with all of this? Today is here in Italy, we're celebrating the Ascension of the Lord. In Nigeria, that was celebrated back on Thursday. That was 40 days after the Lord's resurrection. It was the Feast of Ascension, and today we are celebrating it here for pastoral reasons. The Gospel reading of Ascension actually made a very strong position on what the church should do, the mandate of the church, and that is what I referred here as a church's mandate. The Lord Jesus, before his ascension to heaven, left a statement, and on this commissioned his apostles. We talked about the apostles as people who are sent by the Lord, and they have to work for God for the interest of the gospel. And then this same apostle, has handed over the teaching office, to the successors that we still see continuously in the church today, the unbroken tradition that is called apostolic succession. So what did Jesus say to them? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. So go make disciples, baptize them, make them members of the church, and then teach them everything I have commanded you. So by this mandate, the church becomes a teacher of nations, and she is to act in consonance with the truth of the gospel, that is, in relation to what she received from the Lord and has handed down, to her by sacred traditions. Now, the Lord himself in the word spoken, and of course by the act of the apostles also themselves, we have learned a great deal of what the Lord has said that were not documented. As such, sacred tradition, sacred scriptures, and the magisterium of the church are so connected and associated that one of them cannot stand without the other. So they work together, each in its own way, under the action of the Holy Spirit, and they all contribute effectively to the salvation of souls, according to the Bible number 10. So the magisterium would be in the church's teaching office, the way the church continues to teach us today, by those he has placed in charge of authority or placed in positions of authority. Talk about the Pope, first and foremost, and then the bishops and those who collaborate together in that office of the Holy Father and the bishops, as a body. So the church's doctrine regarding homosexuality is based on the foundation of a constant biological testimony. It is likewise essential to recognize that the scriptures are not properly understood when they are interpreted in a way which contradicts the church's living tradition, meaning that whatever interpretation we have of the Bible, of the scriptures, must always, be in consonance with the tradition, or better put, the tradition itself must be in tandem with the scriptures. It cannot go against the scripture. And then to be correct, the interpretation of the scripture must be in substantial accord with the tradition. So when we are translating the scriptures, when we are interpreting whatever the tradition says, it must also be something that does not depart from what the scriptures itself says. There must be an accord. And this is what the Bishop of the Catholic Church and Pastoral Care of homosexual persons, number 5, actually emphasizes. So what is it that the scripture says? I decided to break this into 3 angles to facilitate our understanding. So we're looking at the position of the church from the angle of the scriptures. What did the scripture say about homosexuality? Then what did the tradition, the fathers before us, what did they say about the same subject matter? And then we'll look eventually at what is it that the magisterium, the church, the teaching office of the church, has said over time about the same subject matter. So we begin first and foremost with the church's position. And then St. Paul reminds us in the letter to the Romans 1:16 that the gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith. The one who is righteous will live by his faith. I want to believe that all of us who are here listening today, about 70 of us, are all people of faith, and perhaps Catholics, if not all of us, but at least I believe that a good number of us here will be Catholics, meaning that we are people of faith who actually are governed, so to say, by the life of Christ and by the testimony of the scriptures. So we are people who actually are supposed to conform ourselves first and foremost with the evangelical gospel, with the truth of the gospel. And then that is why it becomes very important that the scriptures becomes the main page of the discussion. So that we look at it, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, what is the position? Now let us begin with Genesis 18:20, which is the earliest position on what actually looks like related to the discussion. That particular passage talks about the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord says there is an outcry, there is an outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. How that outcry is supposed to be? What is he supposed to do about it? He sends 2 angels to meet Lot, to Sodom. And then, of course, Lot, the brother, the relation of Abraham, saw them and welcomed them into his house. And then what followed after was, the harassment that came from the people of Sodom. They wanted to sleep with these angels. They wanted them for themselves. And all that Lot did to plea, fell on deaf ears until the angels themselves rescued Lot, brought him into the house, and eventually they left the following day and brought about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what was it that he wanted to do? That is actually to sleep with the men. So when you talk about the two of them would go together because it's like a cry, outcry against Sodom. And that is why we also find that one of the four sins that the church will talk about later that cries to the heaven, we have homosexuality ranked among them as the sin that cried to the heavens. Alongside with the help that we have murder, and then we have the unjust delay of wages, that's cheating of persons from having their wages, and of course, when you talk about the oppression of the poor. So these four sins are the ones that the church has taught us cry heavily to the heavens. And then Jude chapter 7 also made reference to this, not chapter 7, sorry, Jude 7, because Jude is just one chapter, made reference to the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah and what happened to them eventually. Leviticus 18:22, forbids a very strong term, saying, do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is talking to a man not to do that with another man, or a woman not to do the same with another woman. He says this is detestable, that this is an abomination. And Leviticus 20:13 affirmed the same thing, repeating that those who actually do this have a very serious, punishment awaiting them, which is death, as it's written. So we can always look that up. Romans 1:18-32 talked about this on a very large scale. In fact, St. Paul outlined a number of things, talking about the guilt of mankind, and the condemnation of unnatural intercourse described as shameless act with penalty. He wrote out a number of things and condemning unnatural intercourse. And by this we can already understand that he was talking about a relationship between a man and a man, and a woman and a woman. 1 Corinthians 6:9 ranked homosexual acts among sins that can inhibit entrance to heaven. That is all the things that we do that helps God pray, it can become a blockage to our entrance into heaven, is what St. Paul put together in that letter to the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 9, among other things. And in 1 Timothy 1:10, he talked about sodomites among those for whom the law was made and who go contrary to sound teaching. That is, he was saying that for those who are born free, those who are not without sin, they don't need the law, because grace abounds for them. But law was made because of those who go contrary to what is good. And because of this, punishment also will be made available for them because they go contrary to this sound teaching. So this is, in a nutshell, what the Old Testament and the New Testament, reflect to us, or to have us have on the concept or the subject matter of homosexual. And I believe that the scriptures are very clear in that regard. Sometimes we have, this is scripture, there are arguments against scriptures as of now, that these scriptural passages are already outdated and they do not apply to modern man because of experiences, because of the discovery of science and all of that. So we can always ask many questions. If the scriptural emphasis or scriptural quotations are already outdated, then what have we actually built in our faith as of today? It becomes a thing that we have to ask ourselves sincerely. If Old Testament no longer applies, then we should throw away the Ten Commandments, as it were. And of course, if the New Testament doesn't apply also in this category, then I think all of us should just close our churches, we should close our Bibles and dump them and just be that, okay, there is nothing guiding us, there is no more religion, there is no faith, and we should just be by ourselves. So what is the tradition saying? The earliest document of the tradition, that is what we have handed over to us by the apostles and their successors, and the early fathers, or those who are called the fathers of the church, what they reflected on in this regard. The first document is the Didache, and which says, you shall not commit murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not commit pederasty. Pederasty is a term also that is used, in the earlier times, and of course, sometimes you find pederasty, sometimes you find sodomy, and then eventually the most common of them now is homosexual, which is particularly, linked down to the understanding of man, woman, because sodomy could involve it could include, accommodate other sexual activities, deviant activities also. That could be, for instance, what a pederasty actually could mean, relationship with the younger men. It could also mean bestiality, that is sodomy accommodating other forms of activities like that. The Eusebius of Caesarea necessary, having forbidden all unlawful marriages and secondly practical practice and the union of women with women and men with men, ye God's hearts. Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for in all of these things the nations were defiled, which I will drive out before you. Now making reference to Leviticus 18:24 to 25 about the nations that were punished, and then of course Basil the Great, who is also a great man in the church, also talked about this in different ways actually. On this constitution, he talked about he who is guilty of unseemliness with males to be under discipline for the same time as adulterers, that is homosexual act. And then also in another round, he wrote about those who actually engage with little children. See, he actually made that distinction, not in the sense of what Dictake actually linearly down to just one. He made the distinctions. John Chrysostom seems to be the most strong among them in regard to his position on homosexuality, and he says clearly all of these affections, which we have seen in Romans 1:26 to 7, was making a commentary on Romans chapter 1 actually, and he said all of these affections were vile, but chiefly the mad lust after males. For the soul is more the sufferer in sins and more dishonored than the body in diseases. So for him, these actually are not things that actually need to be contemplated, not even to talk of being acted out. So the men, therefore, who have done an insult to nature itself, because this he considered as an insult to nature itself, and yet more disgraceful thing than this is it, when even the women seek after this intercourse, who ought to have more shame than men. So he's saying that it is bad enough for men, but even women should be able to have more control. But even when they get themselves getting involved in this, it becomes more shameful. So actually, John Chrysostom is actually condemning both. He's even more or less like bringing out the concept of the part of lesbianism in the same fashion. And I think it's going back to Leviticus also that actually made the distinction between male and female. St. Augustine, that perhaps the name is more common to many of us, says, those shameful acts against nature, such as were committed in Sodom, hot everywhere and always to be detested and punished. If all nations were to do such things, they would be held guilty of the same crime by the law of God, which has not made men so that they should use one another in this way. And the same moral judgment is found among Christian writers. Of course, St. Augustine is saying that this is actually not supposed to be, because God did not make us this way. So more or less like buttressed the position of Chrysostom, that is something that is very contrary to nature and should not be. So among other moral judgments, we find other writers like St. Polycarp, the letter to the Philippians, St. Justin the Martyr, and among others who actually wrote among the fathers. So we'll not look into all of that because of time. So we'll quickly look at what the Magisterium says in this regard. This is actually a bit lengthy because I decided to look at the documents of the church. What is it that the church in its different offices has taught us over time? And summarily, I brought 7 of them together, which I think actually we can look them up ourselves and get better understanding of what the document says in their totality. I just brought out some elements here that could be of help to us. So the first and foremost is the document that came from the CDF, that is Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which now is known as DDF. And here is talking about the Declaration Persona Humana, declaration on certain questions concerning sexual ethics, and this was written in 1975. And in this document, he acknowledged the fact that the tension is still there, because it's something that has been over time. Before this document, there are councils also who have looked into the discussion of homosexuality, over time in the church, but I really want to go back to those old councils actually spoken about. So we look at what the church, as it were, the magisterium of the later time, like starting from 75, has said. So he said at the present time, all those who are basing themselves on observation, the psychological order have begun to judge indulgently and even to excuse complete homosexual relations. We have seen what the psychological order has talked about from the beginning and the changes over time. And we move from this to this and to this and to this, and eventually to the point of having a sense of variation and identity to variant positions. So This they do in opposition to the constant teaching of the magisterium and to the morals of the Christian people. So he said that whatever has been the unraveling of all of that the psychological order said is in defiance to the teachings of the magisterium. And this is what we are asking. What is the magisterium saying? What is the position of the church? So he says a distinction is drawn, and it seems with some reason, between homosexuals whose tendency comes from false education, from a lack of normal sexual development, from habit, from bad example, or from other similar causes, and is transitory, or at least not incurable. And homosexuals who are definitely such because of some kind of innate instinct or pathological constitution judged to be incurable. So immediately we can say that there are two positions outlined here. A transitory position of homosexuality and one that perhaps could be said to be deep-seated. Transitory in the sense that, okay, these are things that could have come about from lack of normal sexual development, false education, habits, and all of that. All of us growing up, in one way or the other, we might have tried to explore with ourselves, maybe boys staying together. At the point you see yourself, you see a fellow man, maybe at the dormitory, and you are seeing the man who did it, that you want to touch, you want to feel. Gradually from there, many things actually happen. And so many persons have been left in that stage, arrested in that stage, and they feel that is the way they are. In fact, a friend will tell me a story about how being a secondary school student in a hostel, they explore themselves and all of that, and they enjoy it for the moment, thinking that is how things, the boys are not around, but of course they enjoy touching themselves. But growing up, maturing in the university, and of course becoming an individual person thinking about all of that, she realizes that this is not what I have. I have actually, been taken over by the title of the defined as a secondary school or school student. And then, she worked on herself and all of that, and she's happily married, enjoying her life. And of course, anything about this is not part of her life. And then there is another companion of hers that was back in the same school where the daddy did all of these things together, who actually today is a confirmed lesbian, married as a lesbian, so a woman, and the life continues. So in this sense, now you can see that some of these elements already mentioned here, false education, lack of normal sexual development, habits, bad example, they could be things also that could, form the way we actually perceive ourselves, and also the way we act and direct ourselves towards some certain things. And of course, he's saying also the document made allowance for the fact that some, for very serious pathological constitution, can have a different idea, deep-seated situations. So he therefore encouraged for pastoral initiative for these persons, especially of the second category, so that even if anything happened, this actually could also be a way, of helping them, judging their situation from a particular standpoint. And but at the same time, it's saying that no pastoral method can be employed which gives moral justification to homosexual acts. That in as much as we can see that certain institutional conditions can actually take a person to behave in a certain manner, but the act itself cannot be condoned. So we're talking about the difference between a homosexual act now and a moral orientation or tendency. And this is very important also to distinguish. And then we'll still see more of that as we go on. So the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, again, in the letter to bishops of the Catholic Church, in 1986, concerning pastoral care of homosexuals, actually, outlined a number of things. And this is actually because of the tension that was going on within the Catholic community. And then the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, felt it necessary to write the bishops of the Catholic Church, telling them about how to go about the situation so that matters were managed. Of course, one of the extent of this urgent pastoral attention needed, so that we can be able to manage the situation of people who are suffering, because these are also sons and daughters of the church. They are members of the church who are suffering, and they also need attention. So the church is not in any way casting aside anyone, but they say that no, these persons, we have to help them, even though we are saying no to the act that they may be perpetuating. So it says it is only in the marital relationship that the use of sexual faculties can be morally good. A person engaging in homosexual behavior therefore acts immorally. This is a condemnation of the homosexual act. not homosexual person. So homosexual activity is not a complementary union. It says able to transmit life, and so it's what they call to life that forms of that form of giving. So in this document also we see that it is very clear. This is a 1986 document. The first one we saw was already a 1974 document. So I tried to come down as the documents actually were developed. And after that, the next document that came in 1992 was the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is actually a central document for us today. And of course, the Catechism on two notes made very, very strong points that actually you find in many books and many articles talked about homosexuality, because the Catechism is a reference material for the church. And in number 2357 says, basing itself on sacred scripture, a reference back to scripture, which presents homosexual act as act of great depravity. Tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. Homosexual acts, they are contrary to the natural law. We have heard that again before, unnatural, and they close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from genuine affective and sexual complementarity, and under no circumstances can they be approved. Homosexual acts cannot be approved by the church. And in that stance, we cannot understand why Pope Francis also would say that homosexuality is a sin, not homosexual person, but the act itself is what people was referring to. It is a sin. And then on his 2358, he says, the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies, we have come back to that concept of deep-seated now, is not negligible. The church acknowledges that this inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. It constitutes a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. And every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. That is what the church teaches in the Catechism. And then again, the CDF in 2003, in response of considerations regarding proposals to give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons, the CDF says no. Why? Because nonetheless, according to the teachings of the church, men and women with homosexual tendencies must be accepted with respect, coming back to compassion and sensitivity. And every sign of unjust discrimination, this is making reference back to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. But it says that the homosexual inclinations is, however, objectively disordered, and homosexual practices are since greatly contrary to chastity. So the homosexual person also is actually supposed to be helped to maintain chastity. And the moral conscience requires that in every occasion, Christians give witness to the whole moral truth, which is contradicted by both the approval of homosexual act and unjust discrimination against homosexual persons. This particular document, which actually, is talking about the recognition, it says, I read the ones conforming to my catechism first so that we can be able to see that there's a continuation. But it says here, marriage is holy while homosexual acts go against natural moral law. So homosexual act, because it is placed itself and not yet that complementary, and therefore as a only union. The concept of union here, we are going to see it later in the last part of it, which is something that is I have to be, my time is up here, but I have to try to see how to close up on what is happening here. The Catholic Congregation for Catholic Education is another congregation, a dicastery for Catholic education now, in consideration of those to be admitted to seminary and also for the nation also here, because we have seen that the discussion of homosexuality has taken different aspects. We have looked at it from the angle of ethics. Just generally, we have looked at it from the angle of marital union, where this is on the angle of education now, admission to seminaries concerning those who are going to be priests and those who are to be ordained. And the instructions constate a specific question of whether to admit into seminary, and for the others, candidates who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies. Of course, we have seen what the Catechism says. And then the document is saying no to this. In the light of the teachings of the dicastery, it says deep-seated homosexual tendencies, which are found in a number of men and women, are also objectively disordered, and for these and for those same people often considered trial. Such persons must be accepted, again emphasizing the sense of respect, but at the same time saying that they cannot be allowed, in fact, let me read from this angle that we consider to us. In the light of such teachings, this is in accord with the Congregation of Divine Worship, the CDF that we have seen, and the other the castries, hold and believe it is necessary to state clearly that the church, while profoundly respecting persons in question, cannot admit to seminary or to holy orders those who practice homosexuality, present deep-seated homosexual tendencies. And a psychoanalyst and expert in social psychiatry explains that this is an exclusive attraction that is talking about deep-seated tendency. Now, what does it mean? Having exclusive attraction with regard to persons of the same sex, independently of whether these have had or not erotic experiences. And the document says, or even those who support the gay culture. So in this, we see that there are three differences here, or three things to note. Those who have deep-seated tendencies and practice, those who are already active, practice homosexuality. Two, that's having deep-seated tendencies, already practicing, or those who support the so-called gay culture. Three of them, these three categories, are not to be admitted to the seminary or to be ordained priesthood. It's a different, however, would be the case in which one were dealing with homosexual tendencies that were only expressions of transitory problems. We have seen this before. Things that actually were learned over time because of one reason or the other, growing up, influences, and all of that. These are issues. These are different categories. He says, and of course, the psychoanalyst says, these are behaviors that we find sometimes during adolescence for various reasons: attraction, aesthetic identification, and all of that. But he says, even though if this would be admitted to the seminary, with these tendencies, they are supposed to have at least overcome this for at least 3 years before ordination to the diaconate. Meaning that these persons can be helped because they can be cured, and therefore they should be assisted. And 3 years before ordination, all of this must have been confirmed that they have overcome their struggle. And then we have the statement, of course, of the delegation to the 63rd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Here the Vatican, the Holy See, acknowledged, appreciate the attempts first and foremost to have been invited to consider this matter on discrimination of persons. But then it says here, having accepted the invitation and of course made a declaration accepting it, despite the statement of condemnation and of protection from all forms of violence against homosexual persons, the document, when considered in its entirety, goes beyond this goal and instead gives rise to uncertainty in the law and challenges existing human rights norms. What this is actually saying is that the document that the Holy Family, that the Vatican and the Secretariat of State actually submitted or prepared for the UN, it is in support of the respect of rights of persons, non-discrimination, and it was ready to actually sign, but realizes that beyond what actually has been stated, there are many other things that would not allow the Vatican to sign the document, and therefore they did not sign. And that is what is expressed that. Despite the statement's right of condemnation of and protection from all forms of violence against homosexual persons, the document, when considered in its entirety, goes beyond this goal and instead gives rise to uncertainty in the law and challenges existing humanity. And these are things that I begin to consider when we begin to put into perspective. All those other antecedents or the other variations that follow the plus, and of course, the implication of this right also for for marriage and for all other things, because the church actually have to look at things also in a holistic manner to be able to take a position. And then the Holy See continues to advocate again that every sign of unjust discrimination towards homosexual persons should be avoided, and urges states to do away with criminal penalties against them. Criminal penalties against homosexual persons is also condemned, and that is why the Holy Father was talking about not being a crime. And that is also something that one would have to be taken within a context, because laws of the states are governed by the principles of positive law by each state. Is different from state to state. And why some persons will say, no, this sin, this which the church considers a sin here, is a crime in our complex. And of course, it will depend on the states to decide what is a crime and what is not a crime. But then, international bodies and appeals and all of that can also ameliorate or intervene to see that, okay, even if you say that this is a sin, this is a crime, but then it should not be treated in this way. And of course, the UN agreement has actually enabled many countries to consider reducing the concept of crime and seeing that, okay, different approaches should be used to look at the situation. And the last document here is the response sum. This is the last one that perhaps many of us actually heard that actually this one came out in 2013, and it was during the pontificate of Pope Francis himself, and it was released by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith again. And here it states, because this actually was looking at, does the church have the power to give blessing to unions of persons of the same sex? That is the, what do you call that now? The blessing homosexual unions. Does the church has the power to do that? And I think it is good we read this it's almost the end. It is not easy to impart a blessing on relationships or partnership, even stable, that involves sexual activity outside of marriage. Because outside of marriage, every form of relationship that has to do with sex or intercourse remains a sin. Outside the indissoluble union of man and woman, open in itself to transmission of life, as it is the case of unions between persons of the same sex. Okay, so the presence in such relationship of positive elements, which are in themselves to be valued and appreciated, cannot justify these relationships and render them legitimate objects of an ecclesial blessing, since the positive elements exist within the context of a union, not ordered to the grace or plan. Because if there were to be a blessing for this, definitely will be a confusion. Because a blessing is a sacrament. And of course, the marriage of a man and a woman in the Catholic Church, validly done, is a sacrament. And it's a close link between the two of them, so that there will be no confusion. And then the church says, furthermore, since blessings on persons are in relationship with the sacraments, the blessings of homosexual union cannot be considered licit. The declaration of the unlawfulness of blessings of unions between persons of the same sex is not therefore, and is not intended to be a form of unjust discrimination, but rather a reminder of the truth of the liturgical rite and of the very nature of the sacraments, of the sacramentals as the church understands them. So the church therefore records that God himself never ceases to bless each of his pilgrim children in this world, because for him we are important to God and all of the sins that we can commit, but God nevertheless does not and cannot bless sin. This was a point that actually created a bomb in the document. He blesses sinful men so that they may recognize that he is part of his own plan of love and allow himself to be changed by God. But he will not bless this because it is a sin. And of course, when we talk about the ends of marriage, the goods of marriage, you understand why all of this actually come to play. We will not be able to enter into all of those ones because of time. And then the last of them is that the church continues to care for those persons. And that is why there is a pastoral initiative, the pastoral care also for them. And this is going back to the document of 1986, the letter to the Bishop on pastoral care of homosexuals that made pastoral provisions for persons with homosexual tendencies and the treated homosexual situations so that they can also be helped. And this is important, And then here it says the departure from Catholic church's teaching or silenced about it is important to listen to this. The departure from the church's teaching or silence about it in an effort to provide pastoral care is neither caring nor pastoral. Only what is true can ultimately be pastoral. The neglect of the church's position prevents homosexual men and women from receiving the care they need and deserve. But in order that the sacrificial offering of his or her faith should be perfected, the person who becomes a disciple of Christ has the right to receive the word of faith, not in mutilated, falsified, or diminished form, but whole and entire, in all its rigor and vigor. Catechesis Tradendae. Because today we see that, okay, I don't want to say much, I don't want to say that, but let us try to just put things down. And then we create so many confusion. And so many confusion are being created today. I mean, talking about even in conferences of bishops and individual bishops making statements. We don't want to go into a lot of those ones because they are very plenty and they can be complicated. But here it's just saying that we should not distort the gospel in order to be able to pass across a message subtly or subliminally that actually create more difficulty for the faith of the people. And in line with this is the teaching of Pope Paul VI that to diminish in no way the saving teaching of Christ constitutes an eminent form of charity for souls. That when the gospel is preached in its integrity and its totality as it were, then we are doing a lot of charity to souls. But if it becomes distorted, then that means we are creating more difficulty. So an authentic pastoral program, therefore, will assist homosexual persons at all levels of the spiritual life through the sacraments, and in particular through the frequent and sincere use of the sacrament of reconciliation, through prayers, witness, counsel of individual care, in each way, in such a way that the entire Christian community can come to recognize its own call to assist its brothers and sisters without deluding them or isolating them. This is always said from the same letter to the bishops, number 15. So here, the document calls for a communal attitude of care within the pastoral family. The church should be able to look at how do we identify with our brothers and sisters who are having this particular challenge, so that we can be able to care for them and help them to be able to overcome them without discriminating them, but loving them, helping them to go to the sacrament and doing all that is necessary, even providing psychological assistance. But then the question remains here, what psychological assistance are we talking about? Because if the psychologists have said that this is no longer a situation of concern or worry, then there is a lot of gaps that has to be filled. There are many persons who are struggling who wish that it could be helped, but even today some psychologists turn them down and say, normal, nothing is wrong with you. So how do you help such a person when the psychologists who could help are no longer seeing it as a problem, but something that is a way of life? And if we have people who actually needed to be helped, how can they find the help that is necessary? So these are some of the difficulties of modern time. And of course, I believe that the church itself, having gone through all of this in time, also is thinking about it. And all of us also who are here and listening could see a way of wanting to help one another. But the position of the church, I think, as we have seen here, has been made very clear that homosexual persons' love and care is supposed to be extended. They should be loved, they should be cared for, and we should try to see how to help them, and if they are struggling, how to help them overcome the struggles. But then it is always a no to homosexual act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Father.